Hello everyone, welcome back to Power for Nothing, a Magic the Gathering podcast. My name is Dan, better known on the internet as 2SweetMTG, and as always I'm joined by my co-host James. How's it going, man?
It's going good, Dan, it's going good. Absolutely knackered, but we're powering through. We're going to chat some Magic, it's going to be great.
I feel it's worth pointing out you're knackered not because of physical activity, just because you woke up from a nap. Can we just...
Listen, I'm an old man, okay?
You're younger than me,
sometimes I need a nap,
and
I need to start sleeping at conventional hours.
No, that's sensible. Yes. Well, the red hot topics for today should keep you wide awake, James, don't worry. Today, our main topic, we are going to be doing a deep dive into Reanimator in Cube. We did one a couple of months ago on Mono Green, and that seemed to go down pretty well. I definitely found it quite helpful and has made me rethink that archetype a little bit. So, yeah, today the main topic is going to be Reanimator in Cube. As always, time codes will be down in the description below if you want to jump around. But up first, as always, our first section is the news. But first up, the Lost Caverns of Ixalan has been released. Pre-released has been done. The set is out. You can get your hands on the cards. James, what do you think of the set so far?
Yeah, I've been enjoying it. I've played a decent number of drafts at this point. There's a lot going on. I think it's quite a quick format, but it's not I think, the boring sort of aggro format where there's no synergy really to speak of. I think the slower decks can work. If you look at the 17 land stats at the moment, they don't tell you that. They tell you that you should be drafting Jeskai-based artifact decks and nothing else. But I've had some pretty good experiences with Descend in the green-black or blue-black. I think this format has... I think there's quite a lot of depth to it. But one thing that has disappointed me is I really wanted the Caves deck to be good. I thought it was going to be Gates in that limited format, and it's really not. It doesn't really work, unfortunately. But I think most of your archetypes come together quite nicely.
That's a shame. Kind of what is the payoffs for the Caves deck? Is it just more lands and stuff you can run, or is there actually like the Gate deck where there's creatures that reward you, stuff like that? Is there anything that actually properly pays you off for drafting your Caves?
Yeah, so there's stuff like red has uncommon, like a 4-mana deal 1 to each creature for each cave in play or in your graveyard.
Okay.
So you can make that into a Wrath of God if you try really hard. And blue has a good value creature, black has a big lifelinker that gets cheaper for the number of caves. And these are all fine things, but it doesn't... the thing is, you have to work really quite hard to make, because the caves don't inherently fix you. So
yes, they're mostly monocolored, aren't
if
they?
you're so if you're splashing around for different payoffs, then you've got to pick a lot of other fixing, and it kind of just requires a hell of a lot to come together. And then sometimes your payoffs aren't even good enough to win the game, even when everything lines up.
Yeah, I guess as well, the one bit of fixing in the set that's a land is the cave, and it's the slow evolving wilds, but other people will want that. It's not like a freebie for you being in the caves deck.
Other people might want that. I think the card's actually pretty bad. I think you can get them because it's bad enough.
Yeah. Well, it's kind of like Shire Terrace from the Lord of the Rings set.
Yes.
Okay.
But the format's pretty unforgiving to you, hanging around and playing that sort of nonsense. There is a cave that makes all your other caves into mana confluences effectively, which is an interesting way to fix. So if you had one copy of that and a couple of ways to find it, that might be interesting. But I think really the payoffs just aren't quite good enough for the cave stuff, unfortunately.
Okay, no, fair enough. Actually, just one thing I did just want to touch on. The fact you said it's actually kind of a fast format, I'm a bit surprised by that. Again, I've only really played pre-release, and maybe the fact I was playing a lot of the life gain, life drain mirrors has corrupted my view of the format of it being quite slow. But yeah, the fact it's actually quite fast is quite interesting.
Yeah, so I think basically there's some really pretty powerful one-drop stuff like the single white 1/1 flyer for 1 with vigilance, and when it dies you explore. That I think is probably the best white common.
Okay.
There's quite a lot of really quite impressive equipment in the set, and a lot of good cheap evasive creatures to put it on. And then stuff like the in red you get the like tap 2 creatures or artifacts to ping your opponent is a really nice piece of reach to finish people off in that deck. And then just because curves end up being really low because there's good options lower down the curve, and then your late game can just be crafting your little artifacts you already played.
Or like the land cyclers are quite good for that as well. They can be played earlier, but also you can actually cast them later, I guess.
Yeah. And I think it kind of works out that even though the removal is theoretically decent in the set in terms of just the quality of removal spells, they're not that well positioned because you're spending 3 mana and killing a 1 or 2 drop quite a lot of time. You know? I think you kind of want to be proactive if you can, is the good sort of week 1 strategy, but then, draft is self-correcting. I think there'll be more options available for drafting slow stuff later on. And as I say, I think Descend, you can get it to work. You just need to be pretty disciplined about your curve.
No, cool. Makes sense. Yeah. I do need to fire up Arena at some point soon and play some games, I guess. But moving on, our next bit of news is they have announced the first 3 at least, Magicons for 2024. In February, we are going to Chicago, and it will feature Protor Murders at Karlov Manor. The end of June, excitingly for us, James, because it's not that far away from us, Magicon Amsterdam, featuring Protor Modern Horizons 3, which should be fun. And then in October, we have Magicon Las Vegas, featuring Magic World Championship 30. So that's quite a lot there. So I was fortunate enough to go to Magicon Barcelona this year, and it was awesome. It's like the first time going back to like an event of that size. Kind of like, it felt like old like GP London, that kind of thing. It was awesome. It was big. It was very cool. And I'm really excited to go back to Amsterdam. Amsterdam's an awesome city anyway, and the fact there's going to be a Magicon there, that seems like quite an easy holiday, don't you think, James?
Yes, I will happily book my flights immediately. V sounds great. I'm sure if you're stateside, Las Vegas sounds cool. Not to diss on Chicago. I'm sure Chicago is great as well.
Chicago's nice. It's just the airport sucks. I have a cold dread when I think of the airport. I spent 48 hours in the airport once.
Oh, right.
That sucked.
Yeah, doesn't sound ideal.
Once you get over the fact it's the airport from Home Alone, there's really nothing else to it.
Sure, fair enough.
The charm wears off after about half an hour of just being I'm waiting for a day and a half now.
Yeah, but that's quite a long time to be sustained by that reference.
It felt like it. It felt like it, James.
No, fair enough. I'll certainly be in Amsterdam, almost certainly not playing Modern Horizons.
No, fair. Well, I think this will be after I'm guessing this is after the Final Fantasy set has come out. So that'll probably be more because Barcelona anyway, the theming, it was after the release of Commander Masters, but it was still Lord of the Rings. That was kind of what was being played. So while, depending on how big they're expecting Final Fantasy to be, it could still be quite heavily Final Fantasy based, if that makes sense. That could kind of carry over into it. Because there's probably more staging and cool stuff they can make for Final Fantasy than maybe Modern Horizons 3. But I guess we'll see close to the time. I had an awesome time going to the one last year. If you're able to go and you have the means, then highly recommend checking them out. They are a ton of fun, and it's just good to get back to big Magic things again.
Yeah, for sure.
And then our last bit of news, we don't normally kind of comment saying there's a new secret layer isn't really a sentence anymore. It's basically we are always either in a secret layer or there is one coming. The one that's come out now is entirely worth mentioning, and purely because they have made a shirtless Jeff Goldblum card.
Didn't you call this as soon as they mentioned this secret layer? Yeah,
100%. So they have to do it, and then when it wasn't in the set, because there's specifically Ian Malcolm card or there's specifically an Ian Malcolm card in the set. It's like, is it? It does chaos stuff, and there's loads of other cards. But I was very disappointed there wasn't just a alt art sexy shirtless Jeff Goldblum, but they made it. They bloody made it, and yeah, it's an art for Tasiga. I have Tasiga in my cube. I might replace it with this one.
Tasiga now uncuttable.
Yeah, it's a staple now.
Well, I'm glad that particular arc works out well for you.
Yes. Single layers are up. I'm probably still not going to buy it. I'll just buy the single when it comes out because it can't be like Tasiga's like 50p. It can't be it can't be super expensive when it comes out. Cool, but yeah, let's move on to our main topic of the day. Today we're going to be doing a deep dive into Reanimator in Cube. So, as an overview, what is Reanimator? What is it trying to do as a strategy? So, Reanimator is sort of a combo. I would kind of classify it as a combo. It's not specifically like individual. It's not like Splinter and Kijiji where it's kind of specifically two cards interact. Reanimator is more kind of you have a combination of cards that the end result is the same every time. Basically, what you're trying to do is you are trying to cheat a large creature, a large impactful creature into play from your graveyard. Generally, the way you do that is you have an effect that will put the card into your graveyard. So like a discard spell or a way of shooting it straight into your graveyard. You'll then get the biggest, dumbest creature that you can find into your graveyard with those spells, and then you're reanimating them into play with a card like Reanimate or something like that. So, an effect to bring it back from the graveyard straight into play. Basically, you're cheating on mana. You're getting a creature out way ahead of curve, something like that.
Yes, ways to cheat on mana are always some of the best things you can be doing in Cube, and Reanimator is maybe like the most straightforward way to do that in a lot of cubes.
No, definitely, and that's the thing. I'm going to get into this as we go through the conversation today, but kind of like Reanimator can be a whole archetype, like it can be what an entire like guild section in a cube is doing, or it can be like a package. It can be like a couple of cards in a cube that you can like make a control deck a bit more interesting, like a mid-range deck and kind of give it a bit more reach, something like that. Yeah, we'll definitely be talking about kind of all the different cards, all the different types of things you need to include in your own cube, and also kind of how the deck plays and how to kind of pull it together, how to draft it, that kind of thing. I guess first place to probably start, James, is kind of what kind of cubes do you tend to see Reanimator in?
So it's actually surprisingly broad-reaching. I think when people think of Reanimator, they tend to think of the very powerful cubes running, Dark Ritual, Entombs, and reanimating huge, like, Archon of Cruelties and whatnot. However, you look at things like Reanimate, Animate Dead, Exhume. These are the sort of premier reanimation spells available in Cube. They're actually all uncommon. So in Peasant Cube, Reanimator can still work very well. The issue is, of course, the things you're reanimating in more powerful cubes are all very much not uncommon. The Atraxas and the Archon of Cruelties. So in Peasant Cubes and the like, I've seen a lot of reanimating of Ulamog's Crushers and the like, that
still kills people.
Which sure does kill people if left unanswered, but there is the fundamental difference there that if they answer it, the player putting Ulamog's Crusher into play hasn't got a load of value up front, which all the targets who play in more high-powered cubes do, but it's still a very valid archetype.
No, definitely, and that's the thing. Like even in like budget cubes, like some of the reanimation spells can be pretty like. None of them are super expensive. Probably the most expensive is like Recurring Nightmare, probably, but that's reserve list. Fortunately for wallet reasons, not fortunately for people who want to play it, it's banned in Commander, probably quite recently. Otherwise, that card would be way more expensive. Other than that, I just looked up how much Animate Dead is, and I don't think it's 550 euros. I'm assuming it's just the version that has randomly been selected in my cube. I'm assuming Animate Dead is like a $5. That's not too bad. Like Exhume's probably not that expensive. So like it can also be run in more budget environments as well. And yeah, kind of what you were saying about the power level of the reanimation targets, that's probably how you adjust it to different power levels of cubes, if I'm honest. So it's like in a Peasant cube, the Ulamog's Crusher is probably more in line with the power level of the cube compared to like Grizzlebrand. Like they probably fit better in the types of cubes that they are, and same in more budget types cubes as well. Like you can kind of adjust your big reanimation target to suit the power level of what's there. That's probably quite a nice way of doing it.
Yeah, 100%. I think if you're finding Reanimator to be a bit too good and a bit too game ending, then you can certainly just tweak the power level of those targets. Because, reanimating a Grave Titan will still win a hell of a lot of games and is still kind of a good enough reason to be doing the Reanimator thing if you get all the other pieces. But it is beatable, which things like Archon of Cruelty and Atraxa often aren't.
No, definitely. And yeah, we'll get into the individual reanimation targets, kind of what we think is the best ones and what you can run, that kind of stuff, in a little bit. But yeah, cool. So I think let's actually just take it back to kind of like the basics in terms of what do you actually need to make Reanimator work. So kind of like, James, in your opinion, what is like the key spells? Like where do you start in Reanimator? What are you hoping to see in a draft? What do you need to include in a cube? Kind of like, what are the key pieces? Like, what do you think is like the number one piece for a Reanimator deck? Let's start there, and then we'll kind of go through it. So
if it's in a cube, I think almost universally the most important card for Reanimator is Entomb. And this, which is obviously single black mana, search your library for any card, put it into your graveyard. The reason is that this is actually a really unique effect. A lot of the time, you can think about Reanimator as almost a 3-card combo, because if your plan is to draw a big creature, loot it away, and reanimate it, you need to draw reanimation target, looting effects, or discard outlet, I should say, and then a reanimation spell. And Entomb is 2 parts of that combo on its own. And then once you have the Entomb in your deck, your tutors become way more powerful, because all of a sudden, all you need is 2 pieces to get your reanimation to work. You just need an Entomb and a reanimation spell. So I'd say if that is available in your cube, then Entomb is pretty much universally the most important card for Reanimator. Obviously, you could be in a spot later in the draft where you needed to prioritize. Say it was pack 3 and your targets were really bad, you might need to take a really good reanimation target over it. But I'd say early in the draft, it's almost always Entomb you want to be prioritizing over everything else if you're in Reanimator.
Yeah, I think the fact as well that Entomb is also like a single black mana and is an instant. It's so unbelievably efficient and so good.
Yeah, and it leads to the really busted reanimation starts almost always start with an Entomb, right? Dark Ritual, Entomb, Animate Dead is a turn 1 Archon of Cruelty or whatever, the best thing in your deck into play. Even without a Dark Ritual, like turn 1 Entomb, turn 2 Animate Dead is an insane start to any Magic game, and it's going to be really hard to lose from that.
It normally, it's unsurprisingly that normally wins. If you're on the play and you do that turn 2, your opponent's got maybe a land in play and you have a Grizzlebrand, it's highly likely you're winning that game.
Yeah. They're going to have to pull something pretty special out of the bag to recover from that.
Okay, so we like Entomb. That's kind of like the best card for Reanimator. But like there are some cards that do a similar thing. Kind of, what's your opinion on Unmarked Grave?
Yeah, so Unmarked Grave is 1 and a black for sorcery. You can search your library for any non-legendary creature card and put it into your graveyard. This is good. The non-legendary thing matters. If you take it early, you can leave yourself in an awkward spot if the best target you get happens to be a legend. But it's such a powerful effect. You do want this card generally, and hopefully you'll have a spot to get a good non-legendary target. Even if, say, your best target's a Grizzlebrand, well, you can also just put a Grave Titan in your deck because it's a fine card. You can sometimes cast it. It will win enough games, and it makes your Unmarked Grave good. So that's certainly a fine one. Obviously, 2 mana versus 1 is a really big deal. It means you don't get those really busted starts. But you know what? Turn 3 to actually cast your reanimation spell generally going to be good enough.
There was a brief period of time where I think Unmarked Grave was better. And it's basically when they printed Unmarked Grave and Archon, but before they printed Atraxa, meaning you specifically wanted another legendary in your deck.
Sure. Yeah, that makes sense.
But then the other one is Buried Alive. So that's 2 and a black for a sorcery that you search for 3 creature cards and put them into your graveyard. So we're going up quite a bit of mana now. We're going up a lot slower. It's a sorcery, but you are getting 3 things. I've run Buried Alive in so many commander decks, but never put it in my queue because it does seem a little bit slow for 3 mana. Kind of like is that what you think, James?
Yeah, broadly. I think if you put it in, sometimes people would play it, but in general, thing is, you don't get that much utility out of creature cards 2 and 3 most of the time. There are scenarios where if you're trying to do like living death type stuff, then Buried Alive is obviously really good. But yeah, in general, like, if you're casting this on turn 3, you're reanimating on turn 4. Like, that's fine. Obviously, you'll need to be sort of interacting before then. That can't be your whole game plan most games. And yeah, at that point, you're getting to the stage where, maybe you'd rather have a Faithless Looting or something, because even though it doesn't tutor for a creature, it will help you dig for the reanimation spell or dig for some interactive pieces to keep you alive in the meantime.
No, that makes sense. And obviously we ranked Entomb super, super highly. We're not just like, are we ranking Unmarked Grave and Buried Alive like just below them, or are these kind of like in terms of your pick order several down, like after like some reanimation spells or things like that?
In terms of my pick order, like early in a draft, if I know I'm Reanimator, I guess that I think Unmarked Grave is still pretty high. Below the really premium reanimation spells, but still a priority.
Okay.
Buried Alive for me is like pretty filler. I'd probably maybe I'd play it if I wield it, but I'm not excited about it.
No, that makes sense. So kind of Entomb, and then it's probably what are we looking at our reanimation, like the actual reanimation effects next? I'm assuming, just because there's a lot of big creatures in cube. We will go on to what we our favorites, like before reanimate stuff, but like generally cubes like will have 6 and 7 drops. That's pretty standard. But kind of like the actual reanimation spells, are they next, James? Would you say?
Yes, for sure. I think specifically the ones that cost 1 or 2 mana. So Exhume, Animate Dead, Reanimate. Exhume being worse than the other 2 because sometimes they have a creature. Also, Reanimate and Animate Dead are really nice to take early because these are actually just good cards in black mid-range decks. The fact that you can hit their graveyard means that you can get a very nice efficient turn later in the game if you, say, Thoughtseized one of their creatures or killed it with a kill spell or whatever, or just getting one of a big creature that you cast earlier back. And that means you can take these early without being 100% committed to Reanimator. But even if you know you're Reanimate, these are a huge priority. If you get access to the cheap ones as well, it makes the tutors a lot more powerful, because like say you have Demonic Tutor in hand, Demonic Tutor reanimates is a 3 mana play. That's so you can do all that in 1 turn, whereas if your cheapest reanimation spell in your deck is say a Necromancy, then all of a sudden tutoring for your reanimation spell and playing it as a 5 mana play, which means you're realistically doing it over 2 turns. So yeah, certainly like the best reanimation spell in your deck is a very important like measure of how strong your deck is going to be.
That's fair enough. So yeah, so it's cheap and efficient is what we're after. Like we're here for a quick time with these kind of decks. We don't care about the life loss from Reanimate at all, do we?
Yeah, like, I mean, obviously it would be a better card without it, but in general, it's like...
Can't have everything,
like,
James.
The thing is, right, if you put your Gristleband into play on turn 2, it doesn't matter that you lost 7 life. Like, if they can't kill it, you're going to hit them, they're going to be dead, It's pretty irrelevant, because you can get it out so quickly that they don't have you under pressure yet, is the thing. Like, there are times when it can matter when you search up later in the game and you're like, oh, I really wish this was an Animate Dead because I can't really afford to take 8. But the raw efficiency of it, like, is just more important over the course of a game in general.
Yeah, and what you said is specifically about, like, just any black mid-range decks should just run them. Like if I'm in black, I will just spec on one of these. Like worst case scenario, you run it in a deck and you're fine cheating a creature that's died back into play, but you could also end up in Reanimator then as well. Like if you see a Grizzlebrand or something like that, you can move into it. But I guess that moves on to the actual powerful target. So there are some very big, scary cards in Magic, James. What are your top reanimation targets? So specifically ones you are looking to put into the graveyard and then bring back into play. What are your favorites here?
So I think what you're looking for in a reanimation target in general, in a really powerful cube, is that even if you're under pressure and even if your opponent can remove it from play, it's going to do so much to stabilize you and get that advantage back that you can still win from that position. You're okay with them having an answer. So I think my top three at this point is probably number one is Archon of Cruelty. It's not that close for me. Archon of Cruelty is, I believe, 6 black. Can tell I've not cast this card very often.
I have cast this card, and it's still good on turn 8.
yeah, that is true. So Archon of Cruelty is 6 black for a creature Archon. It's a 6/6 flyer. And when Archon of Cruelty enters the battlefield or attacks, target opponent sacrifices a creature or planeswalker and discards a card and loses 3 life. And you draw a card and gain 3 life. The first Archon trigger actually does like an unbelievable amount to stabilize you. The life's great when you're under pressure. It gets you them down a card and you up a card is like just enough value that combined with the edict that even if they manage to deal with this, you still feel like you got such a sufficiently big advantage from just that one trigger that you're going to be in a pretty good spot in that game. Even you'll be in a decent spot to be able to hopefully go and try and reanimate again, or to play an interactive game from that point forwards. And really nicely, compared to something like Griselbrand, this doesn't ask anything of you, right? It doesn't ask you to be able to pay life or anything. It gains you life, in fact, and that's really important because you don't want to end up in a spot where you're under pressure from an aggressive deck. You've managed to assemble your reanimate spell with a target in the graveyard, and they can just deal with it and kill you. This does a lot to prevent that. It's really hard to die the turn after you reanimate Archon of Cruelty.
Yeah. Archon is a hell of a Magic card, and the fact that it kind of usurped what I'm assuming is our joint number 2 on this, which was a staple. It's still a staple, but it's kind of like I think the consensus is Archon is number 1, but number 2, I'm assuming we're agreeing with this. Number 2 is Griselbrand.
Controversially, I don't think so anymore.
Oh, okay. So are you on the Atraxa being number 2?
I'm on Atraxa number 2, I think.
Okay. All right. Well, all right. Well, let's read off Atraxa. So, Atraxa Grand Unifier is 3 green, white, blue, black for a 7/7 legendary creature Phyrexian Angel. It has flying, vigilance, death touch, lifelink. When it enters the battlefield, reveal the top 10 cards of your library. For each card type, you may put a card of that type from among the revealed cards into your hand. Put the rest on the bottom of your library in a random order. So they're all very powerful cards. This is a 7/7 flyer that draws you. Is it on average like 3 or 4 cards? Would you say when you cast it?
Yeah, I'd say 4 would be about average.
So yeah, you do get your value straight away from this, I guess.
Yeah.
We'll get onto Griselbrand in a moment. Griselbrand is number 3. It's number 2 to me in my heart, but I do trust your opinion on this. So what is it about Atraxa? Is it the fact that obviously it's a big dumb creature that will stabilize you just from being on the battlefield? It has lifelink, it has flying, it has vigilance, it's getting through. But is it the drawing 4 cards straight away on ETB that you like?
Yeah, and the thing is, it's not just 4 cards as well, right? It's 4 from the top 10. You're looking really deep.
Yes,
and, when you draw your 7 cards off Griselbrand, it's not like you care about all 7 normally, right? There's normally like 3 or 4 that you actually care about. So the way I view Atraxa is it's very similar to Gristlebrand in the body in play if it's not answered, right? They're both pretty unbeatable. Where I view Atraxa is like you basically get the first activation for free, but you're giving up the ability to activate again in the future. And I don't think you very often actually need the second Gristlebrand activation. And not having to pay that 7 life when you for the first activation, for me, makes Atraxa a better target.
No, that's fair. So let's actually just read Grizzlebrand for those unaware, and then we'll kind of give a bit of comparison. So Grizzlebrand is 4. So yeah, I was going to say this is a proper casting cost of a magic card as far as I'm concerned. 4 black for a 7/7 legendary creature demon with flying lifelink. Pay 7 life, draw 7 cards. So I'm assuming with this has the higher potential upside of, in theory, you could draw 14 cards. If you're hitting with it, it gets lifelink, so then you can draw more cards. But I guess with this, if you're on a lower life total, say you're on 13 life and you reanimate this, you can't activate it, you can't draw those cards. Yes, you have a 7/7 flying lifelink, that is good, but you don't have access to that additional card draw that something like Atraxa gives you immediately. Is that kind of where you're going with this, James? Is that why to you Atraxa is a bit higher? It guarantees you that card advantage.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, both of them basically will win you the game if they stick in play almost universally. I've just had a few too many spots where you bring back your Gristlebrand and they point a removal spell at it and you actually can't afford to pay the 7 life in response because you're just going to be dead to their board. And Atraxa at that point, you have already got 4 or 5 cards off the trigger. You can probably deal with their board next turn.
No, that's fair. Yeah. I guess what it is kind of like the Grizzlebrand has like the higher potential upside. Like if you do it when you have 20 life, then cool, you can draw 14 cards, you can get your counter magic to protect it, all this kind of stuff. But in actual games of Magic, like even though we've been saying like turn 1 entomb, turn 2 reanimate, that kind of stuff, like actual games of Magic still happen with reanimated decks. So Atraxa is probably, what are you saying? It's kind of it's just basically it's more consistent. Is it the gist basically?
Yeah. It's more consistent. It's better when you're behind on board and your life total is under threat.
That makes sense, and kind of I think it's worth pointing out kind of like one of the things that these 3 cards all have in common is card advantage. They will draw you cards, and one of the things that is the most devastating in any Reanimator matchup is when the Reanimator player reanimates their big reanimation target. It gets removed because people have removal, it happens, but then using the card advantage from these cards, they have found their second reanimate effect, and then the game is normally over.
Yes, 100%. But I think you really do want reanimation targets that get you something just by entering or leaving the battlefield. You don't really want to ideally reanimate something and just hope you untap with it next turn in order to start getting advantage. Cards like Ulamog come to mind, for example, the 10 mana one that exiles the top half of their library when it attacks. It's indestructible, it's hard to kill, but there's a lot of exile removal in cube, and that doesn't do anything for you just by hitting the battlefield. You're just putting it in play and hoping you untap with it. And you really need to have your targets do a thing right away. You often don't have that turn.
No, exactly. That makes sense. So yeah, like there is a noticeable drop off in terms of the best reanimation targets out there from the 3 we've mentioned, from Archon, from Atraxa, from Grizzlebrand. There is a noticeable drop off from those to the rest of them. Those ones you mentioned are the ones that you see in higher powered level cubes. When it comes to kind of like more budget or like peasant cubes, I mean, obviously you're not running Archon of Cruelty in a peasant cube, but like the drop off below them probably fits more in terms of the power level that's there. Kind of like, I have a hot take on what I think is the 4th best reanimation target.
Oh, go on.
I think it's Troll of Khazad-dûm.
That's a good take. I like that.
So Troll of Khazad-dûm is 5 and a black for a 6/5. It's also a common, which is important. It is a creature troll. It can't be blocked except by 3 or more creatures, but it importantly has swamp cycling for a single black. So this kind of takes me back to kind of what you were saying earlier about Entomb, where it's kind of 2 of the effects stapled onto one.
It's like drawing the discard outlet and the target in one card.
But that's exactly it. It puts itself into the graveyard. Kind of like those kind of effects I've tried before. Like there's been a couple in red that have done it. A few artifacts with cycling, the kind of big artifacts with cycling that put themselves into the graveyard. This is just so efficient, and also the fact that it also fixes your mana. This is effectively a land in your hand as well. So you can do this on turn 1, then you can play Animate Dead on turn 2. Like, yes, it's only a 6/6 and it's not card advantage, but it effectively can't be blocked for the first 3 turns of the game. Like, I quite like the troll. So that is my hot take on what is number 4.
I like that take in terms of, because it's so free to put in your deck is the thing, right?
Yeah.
Like, people just play this card for fixing anyway. It's not, you take zero cost of putting it in your deck, and it's not the dream target to be getting back early, but it's perfectly respectable. I think the other ones that have really impressed me recently is like Atali, I think, is very strong. The 5 red for a 7/7 dinosaur. When it ETBs, you flip exile from the top of your deck and your opponent's deck and cast the first spell you hit for free.
Right, that's it. Yeah. The one that can transform into the 11/11 with effectively infect. But I'm assuming that's not why you're playing it. You're playing it for the.
Yes, I don't think I've ever transformed that card. I did lose a game because I forgot it could transform, and my opponent transformed it. That was definitely a vibe. But yeah, no, I think that card's very strong as a. But I think once you get past those big 3, there is certainly a drop off, and there's a lot of other ones that are sort of fine, and maybe are in there because they have a little bit of overlap with other decks. So stuff like Woodfall Primus, Ashen Rider, these are all perfectly fine targets.
No, exactly. Yeah. Actually, that was something I did want to quickly touch on. It's kind of like having overlap with like what other things in your cube is very important. Like especially if you're building a cube and you're considering putting Reanimator in it. Kind of like what other stuff does your cube have? So like for example, in mine, there's a lot of kind of like artifact. Like I have like Tinker, ways of cheating artifacts into play. There's like Show and Tell and Sneak Attack. So kind of like for the Tinker side of things like Triplicate Titan or like Mere Battlesphere, kind of like they're fine reanimation targets. Like again, they're not the big 3, but they will still win a game if you do the thing with them. Basically, like that is quite good. And in fact, they overlap with with Tinker is what you want. You have like things like Woodfall Primus and I guess actually the Triplicate Titan that overlap with like the flash strategies that we're seeing that that's kind of getting a lot of play in cubes over the last couple of months. Kind of finding ways to overlap your reanimation targets is definitely important, and it's something more that kind of you can do. Like if you're in a high powered level cube, you kind of should probably run the big 3 that we've mentioned, but kind of you will still run these afterwards. You would still run more of these afterwards. But if you're in a cube that kind of is a bit lower powered leveled or a bit more budget, then maybe the ones that overlap with other archetypes are the ones you should be looking at, because then more people will want them.
Yeah, for sure. Things like Mere Battlesphere come to mind as this is also an artifact for all your artifact matter stuff, and a perfectly fine thing to reanimate that kills people dead.
No, awesome, exactly. Cool. So those are our big dumb things. I guess the gist is card advantage, preferably flying, power toughness. We like all that. So after things like Entomb, after our reanimation effects, and after our big beefy hitters, what are you looking for next, James, when you're drafting?
Yes, so obviously this is a very loose order because you will take the premium version of one of these categories over the slightly lower power level effect of another of these categories, and ultimately you need balance. But what I put in next is tutors. So this things like Demonic Tutor, Vampiric Tutor, Mystical Tutor. These are all phenomenal in Reanimator because it is fundamentally a plus B plus C combo deck, and especially if you have things like Entomb or you have a bit of the really premium efficient reanimation effects, these really magnify the power level of those cards. Like, for example, you can have Reanimator decks that maybe only have 2 or even 1 targets because you have an Entomb and you have so many ways to get your Entomb. Even things like Spellseeker kind of count here. But yeah, the top deck tutors like Vampiric and of course the best being Demonic Tutor are absolutely fantastic in this deck. I think if I first pick Demonic Tutor in a draft, which is something I'm very happy doing, Reanimator is pretty near the top of the list of places I'm looking to go with that.
No, that's fair. Yeah. I guess that might be something that I've kind of not valued as highly. I guess, like to be fair, you don't often see Vampiric Tutor or Demonic Tutor past that. They don't normally come around that much in Cube. People are normally snapping them up, I guess. But yeah, that is something that actually I should be considering more. I guess we also need to have some more ways of sticking our cards into the graveyard, James. So how highly do you rank like discard outlets, and kind of what are your favorite choices?
Yeah, 100%. So when we're looking at discard effects, the important thing here is you don't want to have to play things just to put stuff in your bin. You want to play the ones that do other useful things too. So looting effects are at an absolute premium here. Stuff like Faithless Looting if you're in red, or Careful Study in blue. Absolutely fantastic, because they're going to dig you towards your target or your reanimation spell and provide you a way to put a creature from your hand into the graveyard. Then I guess sort of a tip that we're looking at the interactive discard outlets. Stuff like Collective Brutality is really strong. It's just a fine interactive spell on its own, but you're getting for free a way to dump a creature out of your hand. Things like Bitter Downfall, we reviewed from the previous set, fits really nicely into that role as well. Then we also have stuff like the creatures that loot, so like Jacevin's Prodigy, Merfolk Looter, Lutefield Core, that sort of stuff. These can certainly be really strong. If your opponent doesn't answer them, they're going to be one of your better cards, because they're going to get you that selection over the course of several turns and a way to get your creatures into the bin. But just do be aware that if this is the majority of your looting effects on creatures, you are opening yourself up to small creature removal in a pretty severe way, where you, which is not ideal. You kind of want at least some ways to do it that don't rely on you untapping with one of your creatures. And then finally, the ones you don't want to have to play are stuff like Putrid Imp, which is basically just a way to put a creature from your hand into a graveyard. It's a 1-mana 1/1 with an irrelevant threshold ability and the ability to discard a card.
How dare you? How dare you? It becomes a 2/2, James.
Honestly, I've seen that be more of a downside than an upside, because it loses the ability to block.
Yeah, fair.
But yeah, like I think, not that you can never play those, but it is a sign that you haven't quite got there to where you want to be if you end up having to play the stuff like Putrid Imp or Una's Prowler. I think if you end up mono black, sometimes you're a bit more likely to end up there, just to have fewer other options.
So I think more from a cube design point of view, I do think having at least one of those in the cube is important, just so, because stuff like your Jacevin's Prodigy, stuff like your Ledger Shredders, other people want those cards. Like blue decks like Jacevin's Prodigy is a good card in those decks. Like kind of tempo-y decks like the blue creatures that can attack and draw and discard a card. So kind of there is more kind of like people attacking like after those, whereas there is less with stuff like Putrid Imp is more free for the Reanimator deck. So maybe that's kind of something to consider when building a cube. Basically, it's kind of like having something for it to kind of give it that little bit of, basically to throw it a bit of a bone. So kind of like, yeah, it's not great for it, but kind of you can get there with this, basically.
Yeah, exactly. It's the backup one, but it's fine if you end up having to play it. It's also, I think they're more important if sometimes you end up mono black in Reanimator, and that does mean you sort of lose a lot of the good looting options are in other colors. So they're a bit more likely to end up in your deck if you're mono black.
No, makes sense. All good. And then so that's kind of so that's, I guess, the basic package of we've got our stuff we've got our big thing into the graveyard somehow. We've either discarded it or we've entombed for it. We've reanimated into play. We have our big thing ready with there to go. Kind of like, what does the rest of the deck look like? Like is it what kind of like what else do you want to kind of like bring the room together? Kind of like are you after kind of like removal spells, like interaction? Like are you an all-in combo deck a lot of the time, or are you kind of looking for things like counter magic to protect your like your pieces? Are you looking for like things like thought seize, like hand attack to kind of like also protect it from, or do you kind of need like a, or do you need or want kind of a rough combination of all of those things? Kind of like what does the rest of the deck look like to you, James?
Yeah, so I think it's probably just worth saying at this point that these decks really do exist on a spectrum. Sometimes you can put your Reanimate and your Archon of Cruelty into what is basically a blue-black control deck because you just have a couple of discard outlets because some of those cards are pretty good on their own. And this is basically the win condition for your control deck versus sometimes you're a very, very streamlined 1 or 2 color deck where basically this is all your deck does. I will say if you're reanimatory enough that you would sort of describe your deck as a reanimator deck, you basically don't cut good versions of the effects we've talked about for removal or for interaction that often. Having said that, you're not going to get so much redundancy of all of those things that takes up your whole deck. So absolutely, we do want some interaction. The really premium thing I would suggest here is discard. Discard kind of does it all for Reanimator because
So, but that means, sorry, you mean like thought seize, inquisition,
exactly, yeah,
things where also you can see your opponent's hand as well.
Exactly, because you get to take away their interaction or their thing that's going to kill you, and you also get to know whether the road is clear for your to go for your reanimate or not. It also just that information about sometimes your draw lines up where you have a choice of what to reanimate, right? And getting to know your opponent's hand in advance lets you choose the right thing that's going to be really devastating for them.
Yeah,
and they don't have a good way of dealing with. And it's in, obviously, discard is universally in black, and black is your core color for any reanimator strategy. Plus, you end up in spots with things like Thoughtseize can, in an emergency, target yourself.
Oh, yes, it can.
That's actually
it can, and it has, yes.
Yeah. Although it is worth saying, if you Thoughtseize yourself, be aware you have to reveal your whole hand to your opponent. I've seen a lot of people not do that in paper.
Okay.
But Thoughtseize does say target player reveals their hand. So yeah. But yeah, discard an absolute premium here. Counter spells certainly can be good if you're the slightly more controlling version. I mean, any version playing blue will play the good black counter spells. I would say, though, the reason I put them a little behind discard, whereas maybe you wouldn't in some other sort of blue-black based strategies, Reanimator really is very proactive, and you want to be tapping out a lot of the time early. You're not going to just hang out and leave up your counterspell for a few turns until you can go for it all in one turn. Whereas with Thoughtseize or the Inquisition or whatever, you can just run out there on turn one, know whether the road is clear, and it doesn't slow you down from playing your combo pieces. Like, say your opening hand whereas with counterspell, say your opening hand had Mana Leak and a Jace Vryn's Prodigy as a discard outlet. Reanimator really wants to be proactive and just run its Jace out there. And that can run into issues with playing too many counterspells at some point. But yeah, you will still play the good counterspells. I'd say be conscious of your mana here. Some of the black stuff in Reanimator can be pretty pip intensive, so the blue can certainly be a thing. If you're the very proactive version, stuff like Spell Pierce goes up a lot in value because you're trying to close the game quickly, and it lets you go for your combo with just a single mana up and have some protection. So there'll be Reanimator decks where you take that over something that's traditionally more powerful, like Counterspell. And then we get on to removal. You want some removal. You don't want a ton. I'd say, in general, Cube has got more creature focused, so definitely like the really efficient removal is still good to play. Stuff like Snuff Out, Bitter Downfall we talked about, and the
Bitter Downfall,
discard outlets is
great in
absolutely
Reanimator,
phenomenal here. But the again, keep it cheap. You don't need the more expensive removal that gets you a bit of value. You don't need value. You're going to get value when you put your attractor into play. Keep cheap so it can keep you alive and get you to your reanimations effects later. Just a final shout out on the interaction section. I think the best interactive spell, actually, full stop, for Reanimator at this point is Grief. Because it does everything you want with clearing out the interaction and is also a reanimation target. You can very much do the scam thing in Cube. It's just instead of your Undying Evil, you cast Grief and then reanimate it. It's really, really strong.
You've taken the best 2 cards out of their hand, and then you have a 3/2 menace. That's still good.
Sure is.
Nice. Well, kind of one thing you touched on a little bit there is you were specifically talking about kind of like how blue works with the Reanimator. We'll stick with blue, but let's also talk about the other colors that kind of like and how they blend together with Reanimator. So kind of like, obviously with blue we've spoken about some like looting spells with like Jason's Prodigy and some other things like that, like Careful Study, that kind of stuff. What else do you get in blue, like that you could be looking at to put a deck together?
Yeah, so blue supports combo in general very well in Cube, just because it has very good selection. Stuff like Ponder and Preordain is phenomenal here. Reanimator is definitely a deck that is liable to just drawing the wrong. You draw 3 discard outlets and no targets, or you draw multiple reanimation spells and nothing to do with them. Blue just smooths everything out really easily, gives you great looting effects, as you say, counter magic. And I'd say bounce out is, I think when people think about Reanimator and Cube, they generally are thinking about blue-black. And it probably is the most common, but certainly not the only color combination you can play. But yeah, it also does the thing, right, where blue-black as a color combination can also play a very good control game, which means you can kind of just take blue and black cards early, and if you get some Reanimator stuff in there, then it'll be really good for you, but it's not a disaster for you if that doesn't pan out, because you'll probably have a pretty functional deck anyway.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, blue and black is very good at controlling the board and killing things, so we like that. I'm actually just on the topic of blue. Actually, I'm going to throw this your way. What do you think of cards like Thought Scour and like Consider? So kind of like cheap cantrips. So like Thought Scour is a single blue for an instant. Target player puts the top 2 cards of his or her library into a graveyard and draw a card. Do you like those in Reanimator? Like it is technically a discard, but obviously it's not targeted. It's kind of flip it and hope for the best, while also being a cantrip. Like, do you like those effects in Reanimator, or is that a little bit too random for you?
I'd almost always play it because it's, you don't have to staple that much onto drawing a card when it only costs 1 mana. And
True, yes.
Sometimes you will high roll and flip over your Archon of Cruelty and be very happy about it. I'd think it's still I think it's worse than even like an opt, though, in reality, probably, because you kind of just want the selection, Yeah, as likely as you are to, you're probably more as likely to flip over your Reanimate as flip over your Archon of Cruelty, right? You don't have any control over that with Thought Scour. I think, you really just want as much selection as you can get.
No, very much so. Well, let's kind of go round the colour pie a little bit. What do you think about red and black together in Reanimate?
Yeah, this is one I've actually played quite a lot of, specifically in the Modo Cube recently. I think there's some really good pieces there for Rakdos Reanimator. It has a slightly different game plan from Blue-Black in that, they both have the sort of A game of let's put a big thing in early, but the backup plan, whereas the backup plan for Blue-Black is being a controlling deck, the backup plan for Red-Black is being a sort of aggressive-leaning mid-range deck. You get for Buster 2020's red cards like your Ragavans and your Fables and Lelias. Inti from the new set actually seems great here.
Yeah, that card's really messed up, actually.
Yeah, it's really messed up anyway, and is a discard outlet, right? Yeah, and red also gives you access to stuff like Faithless Looting and actually some good little value looters as well. Stuff like Magmatic Chandler can work pretty well.
Yeah, or even I got like Cathartic Pyre, actually. It's just a deal 3 damage to target creature or Planeswalker, or discard 2 cards and draw 2 cards.
Yeah, for sure. And I think this is also a bit of a beneficiary of Cube just being a bit more creature-based than it used to be. Like, getting more removal in Rakdos is actually still pretty good interaction at this point. So, I found this to be a pretty good place to be. I'm not going to say it's like better than blue-black or anything, but often in very powerful cubes, blue is very overdrafted because it's, probably the most powerful color, and often you can get some of these good Rakdos cards pretty late. Stuff like Bloodtithe Harvester is a card that almost always wheels and is really, really strong here, actually. Like, it's one of those cards which isn't tremendously flashy in any of its modes, but it just does a lot for you. Like, it's a reasonable threat, it can kill a small creature, and it's a looting effect. Like, that's a lot for 2 mana.
No, that's fair. I think it's worth mentioning that red does have, in fact, the best discard outlet. I would say that Sneak Attack is the best discard outlet. If you want to put a creature card into the graveyard, why not put it into play for 1 mana, attack with it, and then it goes to the graveyard ready for you to reanimate it afterwards?
Yeah, why not nug them for a cheeky 12 on the way through,
Yeah, exactly. That's the thing, like specifically like sneak attacking in like Archon or Atraxa and then just reanimating it back is kind of brutal, to be honest.
Yeah, 100%. You need to be like, pay slight attention that you have your targets you want to reanimate are the ones that also work well with Sneak Attack and vice versa.
Yep.
But yes, that is certainly sort of a overlapping game plan that can work very well.
Yeah, if I'm honest, that's my favorite build of Reanimator. The Sneak Attack through the breach version of it. It's one I've had most success with, but that's, I guess, because as you said about blue being drafted quite heavily, I often don't get those cards. But yeah, the Rakdos stuff comes around. Yeah, I really like that. Let's talk about another of my great loves, green-black, James. Green-black. What does green-black offer us for Reanimator?
Green-black is a little bit harder to get to work, I'd say. The thing green gives you access to, which can be pretty interesting, is stuff like Survival of the Fittest and Fauna Shaman.
Yeah, it's proper magic cards, James.
Yeah. The issue is those cards both require your deck to be very creature dense.
I thought you were about to say it requires them to run green then.
Requires your text to be really bad. No. So I think green-black can work. I think often this is the one which has more of a plan to cast its targets a lot of the time. I think you can have green-black decks that are like, hey, I might cast this Grave Titan or I might reanimate it. And it's certainly a really good home for Recurring Nightmare, which is one of the reanimation spells we haven't really talked a lot about, but this is the 3-mana enchantment. You can return it to your hand and sack a creature to return a creature from your graveyard to the battlefield, which is obviously more work than all the other reanimation spells if you're only doing it once, but lets you over several turns do it a lot of times.
This is so unbelievably grindy, yeah.
Yes. Green can be a really nice home for that because it gives you a lot, like dorks to sacrifice later and to get your mana out early, and then you just grind them out with these value creatures, and that can be really nice. And yeah, it's good at casting the targets when reanimating doesn't work out.
Yeah, if you've not played a game of Magic where your opponent has Recurring Nightmare and Gruff Triplets, the thing that makes like loads of tokens, they get bigger when they die, and just keep bringing it back, like, ugh, dear God, it is miserable. But
That's going to be one of those games where your opponent concedes and you're really mad about it because you're like, no, I was going to put so much more power into play next turn.
No, I somehow won that game, James.
Oh, sick.
It was
Nice.
exact C's, but like sweating bullets from my end. How do I not die? How am I not dead? But I think the green-black one is slightly more grindy. It's less like it's more mid-range. I think it's fair to say. You are actually trying to cast your things. The games are going a bit longer. Maybe that's why it doesn't work as well in like higher powered level cubes. I mean, it's like the Mitgo Vintage Cube there because people are doing more broken things earlier, whereas there's no room for mid-range, I think, in the Mitgo Vintage Cube a lot of the time. So that's probably why it's not as good there. But like in lower power level cubes, and even mine, which is unpowered vintage, I quite like it, but I would concede it's not as good as red black or red blue.
Yeah, for sure. I think the last thing I'd shout out on green black is Channel can be an interesting card for Reanimator decks, but you need quite specific things for that to actually work. Partly because the things you'd naturally want to channel, stuff like Emrakul doesn't stick around in the graveyard, so you need instant speed reanimation spells to get it back, stuff like Shallow Grave. So it can make the channel Reanimator overlap a little bit tricky. But you can also just, channel on turn 4, then play black, and cast your Archon of Cruelty is certainly an acceptable way to try and go about it.
No, that makes sense. Well, there's one colour left to talk about, and I think it's fair to say that white is, in higher powered level cubes, is probably the weakest. In lower powered level cubes, because it does have some redundancy, it could be a nice little support colour. But so white does have some of the best reanimation targets in a way as well. Like Iona, Shield of Emeria is quite a powerful magic card. That's the one that, when it comes into play, your opponents can't cast spells of a colour you choose. That's quite backbreaking. And Elish Norn is sort of a mini board wipe a lot of the time as well. These are both quite powerful things to cheat in. But I guess it kind of struggles a little bit, and maybe correct me if I'm wrong here, James, but just because it doesn't have it doesn't do the discard thing, doesn't do the card draw thing. It doesn't add anything to the deck in the way the other colours do, basically.
Yeah, I think that's reasonable. White just doesn't overlap as naturally with reanimating as a strategy. It certainly has some individual cards that are interesting. Stuff like, is it Priest of the Fellright, the white-black for a 2/2 with an Earth, and you can tap and sack it to get something back. It's certainly a powerful card, but it's just hard to have enough of those things that it actually makes you want to be white in your Reanimator.
No, that's fair. Like there is a reanimation spell it's black to cast with a white flashback cost.
Yeah, and Burial Rites is certainly an interesting card. It's really good if your opponent's plan to deal with your strategy is to try and counter your reanimation spells, because they have to have 2 counters. It also does some interesting things if you're also blue with Gifts Ungiven.
Oh, okay. Okay, nice. Yeah.
So what you can do is you Gifts Ungiven, but you only select 2 cards. And your opponent has to put both of them in the graveyard, and you select Unburial Rites and whatever you want to Unburial Rites. And that can be kind of nice because it's like almost a 1-card combo, right? You just needed to draw the gifts. But it's also like, I think in reality, most of the times I've played Unburial Rites, I've just been splashing it. I've not been white-black.
So those are the colours, but let's talk about kind of overlaps with other like archetypes, because plenty of other decks want to cheat things into play. So a minute ago you mentioned like some of the instant speed versions of these reanimation spells. So we're talking things like Shallow Grave and Corpse Dance. These are effects that at instant speed, a lot of these take the top card of your graveyard, meaning graveyard orders matters, the way Magic was meant to be played. And puts it into play. It's in play for a turn. It gains haste, and then it either dies or is exiled at end of turn. So compared to other reanimation spells, those aren't as good purely on the fact that they die, that the creature dies at end of turn. Specifically, if you have creatures that, when they go into your graveyard, are shuffled back into your library, you can pop them out at that point where they're in your graveyard. So I mean, specifically, the biggest creature in Magic, like big 15 mana Emrakul and like Blightsteel Colossus. Like, in theory, those are two things which, if they're attacking with haste, you just win the game then normally.
So 15 mana Emrakul, yes, absolutely. Great reason to do this. Probably the best reason to do this. Actually doesn't work with Blightsteel Colossus.
Is it not? Is it not the same thing? Or?
There's a few that are like this. So when you put 15 mana Emrakul into a graveyard, there's a trigger that goes on the stack to shuffle your graveyard into your library. Blightsteel Colossus is a replacement effect.
It says if it would be put into the graveyard. Oh, so it never actually goes into the graveyard.
There's not a moment where it is in the graveyard and you can cast your Shallow Grave.
So why do people run Blightsteel Colossus? Is it just Tinker? Is that the reason why people run Blightsteel Colossus in cubes?
Yeah, Tinker. Some people like sneak attacking it in. I actually think it's pretty overrated.
Yeah.
The issue, I don't like it as a sneak target because you block it with a 2/2 and it's like, sure, I'm on 9 poison. You have nothing else in your deck that deals poison.
Yeah, exactly. That was fine. Yeah.
Okay. But I'd say the Eldrazi Titans are really the main reason to be doing this. So 15 mana Emrakul, obviously the best, but Ulamog and Kozilek also very valid. This is very strong if you can put it together, but it does ask a little bit more of you. Because you're basically down to just Shallow Grave and Corpse Dance as reanimation spells.
Also, Necromancy, I think, does it, doesn't it? Or does Necromancy not give it haste?
Necromancy is tricky. So the issue of Necromancy, which is the 3 mana aura, which can get something back.
Lots of words on this card.
Yes, so you can cast it at instant speed, so you can get your thing back, but it doesn't give it haste. So if in your first main phase, you discard your Emrakul, you put it back into play, then you just have an Emrakul that can't attack and it goes away in your end step. That's very bad. Don't do that. You can kind of make it work because it goes away next end step. If you do it in your opponent's end step, then you can attack with it on your turn. But it's not. But it's making it a little bit tricky.
That would also require you discarding the Emrakul at that point as well.
Yes, you've got to discard at instant speed and your opponent's end step.
Yes, so hoops. So hoops. I'm hearing. Okay, good. But I guess worth mentioning is that's more the overlap with like the sneak attack stuff, with like the sneak attack style of decks. We also have some overlap with like Flash. James, you want to talk about Flash in Cube and how it overlaps with that?
Yeah, so Flash is just another way to really cheat on mana very effectively in Cube. This is the 2 mana instant. Put a creature card from your hand into play, and then you sacrifice it unless you pay its mana cost -2, basically. You never pay. The thing you want to do with Flash is it gives you the ETB trigger and the death trigger of whatever you put into play. And it can be fantastic in your Reanimator deck if the things you want to reanimate are just also happen to be things that work with Flash. So stuff like Atraxa is good here. It's not like phenomenal with Flash, but it's like a lot of card draw for 2 mana. And then, but I'd say the best ones are probably, for this overlap specifically, are probably Woodfall Primus, because you flash in a Woodfall Primus, you get the ETB trigger of blowing up a land or whatever, and then it persists back, blows up another land, and you have a 5/5, which is really nice. And then and is also just a good thing to reanimate. Flash Atali, also very nice.
Assuming Worldspine Worm's going to be pretty good.
So Worldspine Worm is, I'd say, probably the best thing to flash in Cube, but has the issue that it doesn't work with any of your Reanimator stuff, because it has the Blightsteel Colossus text of it will shuffle back into your library if you put it into your graveyard. So it can be kind of tricky. It's good with sneak attack as well if you have that going on in your deck. But yeah, just be aware that ideally if you're running sort of reanimation spells and other ways to cheat stuff in, ideally you want your creatures to work with both. And stuff like Worldspine Worm that only works with one of those two things, therefore kind of goes down a little bit. You're going to be really sad when you have your your Faithless Looting and your Reanimate and your Worldspine Worm, and it doesn't accomplish anything.
No, it makes sense. A couple of other archetypes to run over. Oath of Druids. This is again similar to Channel. Is kind of like a one cardy build around type thing. I'm gonna quickly get the errata text for Oath of Druids.
I reckon I can do Oath of Druids from memory.
You sure? Okay. You want to go? You want to give it a go?
But pull it up and you can tell me where I'm wrong.
Okay, cool. Right. James, Oath of Druids, take it away.
Oath of Druids is 1 and a green for an enchantment. At the beginning of your upkeep, if your opponent controls more creatures than you get to reveal cards from the top of your library until you hit a creature card. The creature card goes into play. The other cards go into your graveyard. This can be phenomenal in Reanimator, but it puts a pretty big deck building restriction on you because you don't want to put a bunch of the cheap creatures into your deck. So it's because you don't want to play your Oath of Druids, trigger it, and reveal Jacevin's Prodigy. You want to reveal Atraxa. But if you can build your deck without those cheap creatures, then Oath of Druids will be one of your best cards. It's really, really strong if you have like 4 creatures in your deck and they're all big reanimation targets. It is also worth noting, in certain matchups, it can be worth just boarding this in, even if you do have the little creatures in your deck, because your opponent's just always going to have more creatures than you if they're on like White Weenie, say. And then this will just be like a good, strong, like, gets you cards, gets you value, cheat you on mana a little bit, maybe, even if, because, in most decks, if they're always having better creatures than you, then just getting this trigger, more creatures than you, then just getting this trigger every upkeep is good, even if half of them are hitting, like, cheap stuff. It's like, the cheap creatures you still put in your deck are still, like, presumably doing something. They're going to be looting, or they're going to be, like, Mesmeric Fiend type effects. Yeah, so you can play it contextually, even if you do have some of the small creatures. But if you don't have any of the small creatures, this will be one of the best cards in your deck.
Oath of Druids is the card that I actually want to see. I always want to see it pack one, pick one. Because it's like, yes, okay, cool. This is what I'm doing. I'm at the best point to do this. I'm not drafting any small dorky creatures. We are going to town on this. That's
yeah. It's also cool that it puts off, and worth remembering, actually, don't deck yourself.
Don't deck yourself,
it
yes.
puts all the other cards into your graveyard, not on bottom like these cards tend to do now. And it is optional, so just be conscious of how many creatures you have left in your deck. You may want to decline the trigger at some point in order to not deck yourself. But yeah, it can do interesting stuff with, like, I've seen Oath of Druids decks where, like, the only creature is Eternal Witness, and you're basically using it as a fancy tutor because you're going to, like, put your deck into your graveyard and then regrave something. But that's not Reanimator. That's just a cool thing you can do with Oath of Druids.
I really want to do the no creatures, all planeswalkers, this, and Nexus of Fate.
Ooh, that's spicy.
Just take infinite turns. It's quite slow, but kind of cool.
Yeah. That sounds great.
And then there's one last. So the other ones that we've mentioned, the other overlaps with colors, with archetypes, I'm all good with. You've written the word storm here, James. Care to explain yourself a little bit? How does storm go with Reanimator?
So basically, the way storm overlaps with Reanimator is primarily Dream Halls. So Dream Halls is the 3 blue for an enchantment. Each player may cast spells by pitching a card that shares a color with them, or discarding a card that shares a color with them, like exhaling. Dream Halls is great in a storm deck. It will really pushes you to play a lot of wheels. When you have your Dream Halls going, your plan A is to basically cast Dream Halls, cast a Wheel of Fortune, or a Time Twister, or some similar type effect, and then you have a fresh hand of 7, which can draw you a bunch more cards and eventually do something to win the game. The thing you do to win the game can be, like, cast an Archon of Cruelty, but these decks also just have a lot of ways to put stuff in the graveyard, so you can just chuck a random Reanimate and Animate Dead.
Oh, I get you. Yeah.
Deck. And because when you're storming off, and this can be true even outside of Dream Halls, when you're storming off, you make so much. If you can make sufficient mana and see enough cards, you can kind of win with whatever. Like, this isn't easier than winning with Brain Freeze. This is significantly harder than winning with Brain Freeze, but sometimes you don't have Brain Freeze. And the thing that you do instead of Brain Freeze can be like reanimating Archon or whatever.
Okay, sick. No, I like that. Cool. So I think, we've kind of covered a fair bit of ground here today. Let's kind of talk about matchups, kind of where does Reanimator sit in terms of like cube decks and games you're going to be playing. What do you think, James? Like I know that when I've either played Reanimator or played against Reanimator, a lot of time just having that golden bullet of like, we could be playing Magic today, or I could be winning on turn 3.
Yeah, exactly. I think there are certainly decks that the average Reanimator deck would like to play against more or less. But when you get the really good version of this, if someone tells you they have a good matchup against you, I tend to not believe them. Because you're just so quick, and if you get any amount of disruption in first, you can just snowball. Like, a lot of it, some of the time, it just doesn't matter what your opponent's doing. Like, nice ban league. I've already got a Gristlebrand in play. What are you going to do? Having said that, you don't always end up with a nuts version. Sometimes you're a bit more middle of the pack, and then you do have more preferences about what you'd like to play against. Stuff with a lot of cheap interaction can be tricky. Discard is very good against you as well as for you, and cheap counter spells are excellent against Reanimator decks. There's also obviously graveyard hate, which can be an issue. Most of the graveyard hate people tend to actually put in cubes is more like Scavenging Ooze and Lion's Sash and Rest in Peace. And those things you can just kill.
I personally hate like specific just like sideboard cards, and Rest in Peace is specifically a sideboard card. Like, no one's main decking that. But like there has been an uptick. Like Lion's Sash and Endurance were printed recently. Armor Scrap Gorge is another one. Reanimator can just still get ahead of them, but it does mean that there's kind of more interesting matches, I think, because like you have to play around like when you discard your thing a little bit more with those kind of like if your opponent has a Skoos in play or a Lion's Sash, something like that, there is a bit more play to the games rather than just like it's always free. I'm just waiting to draw the discard spell.
Yeah, 100%. Actually, the other thing, which I think is a bit underrated that people can do against your Reanimator deck, is if they happen to pick up a random Necromancy that was going around the table or an Animate Dead, they can reanimate out of your graveyard. That is a thing you need to be careful of as well. If you're playing any sort of mirror, or just if you think, well, I know I had to take that Entomb over that Animate Dead, and I didn't get that Animate Dead back. Might have been in my opponent's pile, that is something to be aware of.
Yeah. Or I guess even things like Phyrexian Metamorph or like Phantasmal Image. Like Phantasmal Imaging their Archon is a pretty good way of answering an Archon.
Yeah, 100%. One of the more savage ones that is not currently in the Modo Cube, but it's kind of in and out of it, is Gilded Drake as well. That's certainly one to be careful of. So yeah, you've got to be conscious of what the tools your opponent might have. But often you have good game and you can play around them. The stuff you generally do want to play against, I find, is aggressive decks. You tend to just go bigger quicker than they do. And mostly they're not going to disrupt you too much.
I guess maybe white could be a bit trickier just because they might have exile effects, which I'm assuming that's specifically like what we said earlier about like one of the best things about like Archon and Grizzlebrand is they can draw you into your next reanimation spell. But if it's been exiled, then it's a bit trickier to bring it back. Then you actually do need the second big thing. But then there's maybe something you can fix in sideboarding. Maybe you put the worm coil in that you weren't running previously, something like that, maybe.
Yeah, for sure. And it's why it's so important that your creatures get their value up front, right? If you put an Archon into play against your white aggressive opponent, you're probably fine if they kill it. You've got a creature out of there, you've got a card, you've out of their hand, you're probably fine at that point. But yeah, if your reanimation targets aren't those ones that are super impactful immediately, then you could certainly run into issues there. Also, another card to be conscious of, that we should have mentioned talking about Graveyard Hate, is I think Containment Priest is probably the best of them.
Oh, that's fair, yeah.
Just because, unlike things like Armored Scrap Gorger and Line Sash, you don't see it in play, and when it gets you, it really gets you, and that can be very hard to come back from. But I think, in general, white aggro is a pretty good matchup. I think red aggro tends to be a very good matchup. Green ramp, I think, tends to be pretty good as well.
No, cool. Right, I think we're kind of coming towards the end of the topic. I think there's kind of one thing I did just want to touch on. It's kind of when you're drafting online, when you're going in, only playing this on Mitgo, because your opponents win those ticks. One thing with playing in person, I would say, is Reanimator is probably guilty in my cube of leading to the most downtime between rounds, and it can be a bit of a feel bad. It's something to consider. Like if you're in basically this comes down to balancing the cube. If everyone is coming into it knowing that kind of it's a higher powered level environment, and you can get Grizzlebrand on turn one, and you can basically your 2 rounds could be over in like 10 minutes, and everyone else is playing for 40 minutes. Like these are things to consider. So it's kind of like when it comes to power leveling your cube, kind of like a lot of things we've spoken about, kind of like the Grizzlebrands, the Atraxas, the Archons, the turn 1 or 2ing, reanimating them. Those are for more higher powered level, more for high power level environments. Kind of because like some of those key pieces you can pick up for not that expensive. Kind of Archon's probably gone up. Yeah, actually, like so you could run a good close example of the highest power level package, maybe not running Atraxa because Atraxa's quite expensive, but everything else is like around a tenner or less. You could add that to most budget level cubes or you could work towards them. It doesn't mean that you should, is kind of what I'm trying to say. Like Reanimator can lead to a lot of non-games, but I guess that's the point of it being very powerful.
Yeah, I'd agree with all that. I think making sure there's some good counterplay in the cube, and it's just making sure that the ability to reanimate something busted on turn 2 is like in line with the power level of the cube. And there's easy ways to slightly downshift that if you want to. Yeah, like putting an Archon to play on turn 2 is like basically always game over, whereas if it's a Grave Titan or a Mere Battlesphere or even a Woodfall, perhaps, like, there are things your opponent can have to realistically come back from that.
Yeah, no, exactly. And also there are reanimation spells at like 3 or 4 mana. Like maybe instead of like in a power level 1, maybe instead of running like reanimate so you can do it on turn 1, you could run like a 3 or 4 mana one. Like there's plenty of those, and they're a lot cheaper. Like Dread Return, which is one of my favorite cards to reanimate stuff with because it can do it from the graveyard. But that's got to be like 10, 20p right now, something like that. So there are things to consider as well.
Yeah, for sure. The makeshift mannequins of this world can get in at that point.
That was in the Mitgo cube for way too long, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was. I never really quite understood why.
Nice. Well, I think we're kind of coming to an end now. Are there any stories around Dutch James that you can think of for Reanimator? I know I have one. So despite how well this went for the person who I was playing against, they were on Reanimator, I was not. They win the die roll. They choose to draw. I play a land, pass to them. They draw their card and immediately go to discard. They do not play a land. They discard Grizzlebrand. Goes to me. I play a land, play a creature. Goes back to them. They play a land. They reanimate Grizzlebrand. They do have a Grizzlebrand on turn 2. They do this both games. They win both games. But they do it both games. And I... because also, like, even though they've won it, I'm like, well, obviously I'm still going to play. I'm not going to draw just so they get around this. But I'm assuming that's not... It's annoying. It's really, really annoying that worked against me. But I'm assuming that's not optimal, James.
So... you 100% shouldn't be choosing to draw to give yourself better outs of doing this, because it's still quite, you had to draw the Grizzlebrand and the Reanimate for that to work, right? But I will say, when you look at your opening 7, if you're on the draw and your opening has 7 lends itself to that, like I will keep a 7 with like a Swamp, a Gristlebrand, and a Reanimate on the draw and not play a land on turn 1.
Okay.
Because like turn 2 Gristlebrand is just so busted that you can afford to skip a land drop to do that.
Fair. Okay. So it was good play, not just me being annoyed.
It was, I think, a big mistake to choose to be on the draw. I think that is because a lot has to come together for this to work, and it's still way better to be on the play and play your looting spell on turn 1 and reanimate on turn 2 with an extra land in play, right? But just if your draw lends itself to that, like I'm not mulliganing that hand, I'm keeping it and not playing a land on turn 1. I would say it's not worth doing this if you're like skipping multiple land drops generally. Like if you're on the play, it doesn't really work. If you've mulliganed, it really doesn't work. There is also a really bad scenario where you do that and then your opponent plays any sort of discard spell and you can't discard hand size. And they took your reanimate. So there's a lot of ways it can go wrong, but like sometimes you're playing, it's a kind of high risk strategy, but it can, I think there are like times when it is correct to do that.
No, fair enough. Okay, so maybe keep that one in your back pocket.
Yeah.
Then is what we're saying. Fair.
Yeah, it helps know the matchup a lot as well. Like, I'd be much less willing to do it if I knew my opponent had good ways to interact with it.
I think I started with an island, James.
Yeah. I'm not saying your opponent's line is good. But, like, if you know your opponent's on, like, mono red, say,
that's
and
fair.
your opener puts Archon into play on turn 2 if you didn't by skipping a land drop on turn 1. Like, you're just winning that game, right? Like, 90% of the time.
Fair. Okay. That's gone from me being amazed by the bollocery of my opponent to having, okay, fair play. Well done. I respect that. Okay. Right, so I think we're going to end our deep dive on Reanimator there. Do let us know if there's any other archetypes or anything like that you'd like us to do a deep dive on in the future. It's definitely something we like doing. I always feel like I learn a little bit when we do them as well. So do let us know. You can message us on Twitter, all that kind of stuff. Our links will be down in the description of the episode, that kind of stuff. Let's move on to our last topic of the day. What have we been playing? So a couple of bits for myself. So first, we did pre-release, James, a couple of weeks ago for Rivals of Ixalan. I did the Gods Perfect 1-1-1, 1 win, 1 draw, 1 loss. As I mentioned earlier, it was I did really enjoy it. Like my games were very interactive and kind of like grindy, but a lot of decisions. Like I was a white-black kind of sacrificey, grindy deck, but I was not enamored with that archetype. Like I was playing a lot of kind of synergy pieces, and I should have just cut the 3-mana 1/4s that kind of sack and drain something for just a creature with some power. But you live and learn. Like a lot of cool stuff. I can't remember. I had the 4-mana mythic. It's like 2 white and a black for a 4/4 with flying with some other abilities. The main thing, it was a 4-mana 4/4 flyer, so that was pretty good.
Yeah, that sounds great.
We like that. How about yourself, James? How did your pre-release go?
Yeah, it was good. I went 3-0 with green, black.
Let's go.
Green, black playable magic cards, I think would be the theme.
Perfect. The perfect pre-release pool.
Yeah. I had like some Descend payoffs, but just not really enough great enablers. So kind of struggled on that front. But I found people were really, really keen on playing dinosaurs in the seals. The actual MVP for me in that pre-release was it's called Cosmium Confluence. It's like 5 mana. You get 3 modes, but you choose 3, but you can choose the same one more than once. And anyway, one of the modes is you put 3+1/+1 counters on a cave you control, and it becomes a creature. So you can just make a 9/9.
Yes, that's how I died. Like in the game I lost, it was quite convincing because my opponent did that twice.
Right. Yeah. That makes sense.
Like they also, if you have the cave in play, it's just a 9/9. But worst case, it's it finds you a cave and makes it a 6/6.
Yeah, and it's a 9/9 haste as well.
Yes.
It's really messed up.
Miserable.
Yeah.
Miserable, James.
Yeah. I think actually, like, probably not that incredible in draft, just because it's like there's more streamlined stuff. But in sealed, when everyone seemed to be about like, look at my big creature, I was like, well, I've got a bigger creature, man. Like, what are you gonna do? But yeah, I had the sense of I had like the Myco Tyrant, for example, the green-black mythic, and
that's cool.
I think I actually just shouldn't have played it. It was
no, James, you play your mythics. That's we all know the judge of a good sealed pool is how many rares and mythics you're running.
That is true. It's true.
It's just natural,
even if they don't do anything.
Not the point. You can have more of them.
But yeah, no, it was good. I had some decent removal and creatures, and that was enough.
So actually, I think every game I play, every game I played, someone, including myself, resolved Chimil, the Inner Sun, the 6-mana legendary artifact. The spells you control can't be countered. That never came up, but it has at the beginning of your end step discover 5. So every end step you just flip through your deck and find something that costs 5 or less and put it into play. I think there was 18 people in our side of the pod for pre-release. I think 9 or 10 were opened in our side of the pod.
Wow.
So
yeah,
every game I played had this in it, and it was some of it did come down to who resolved theirs first. I'll be honest with you.
Yeah, that card's absurd. It's so it reads as like maybe this is a bit slow, but then I think it's the fact that you end step, so you get it immediately. You are kind of affecting the board that turn, and then if it, a couple of turns of not dying with that in play will generally be enough to turn the corner.
It was just, them looking at each other was quite, okay, let's go. Yeah. Again, maybe that's why I think the format's slow and grindy, because it's just everyone's putting in 3 4-drops every turn.
Yeah, that might not be entirely representative.
Yes, I can see that, yeah. So that was a couple of weeks ago. But last weekend, we did a cube drop, James. What did you end up on? We didn't play each other in the end, did we?
Yeah, so I ended up on... So I took some decent artifact payoffs kind of early. And I was kind of trying to do some trash for treasure stuff. I had an Urza trying to do some big mana stuff. But I didn't really get the discard outlets for my trash to treasure side, and kind of ended up going a bit more just make some constructs. I had a lot of 2-mana accelerants, and then a Saga and a Karn, and beating down with those was pretty good. I lost in the finals to Boros Aggro, doing Boros Aggro things.
Yeah.
Oh, no, not the finals. No, I was... Yeah, I went 1-2. No, I was already 1-1, and then I lost again. I went 1-2, yeah.
I also went 1-2, spoiler.
Yeah. The deck was not great. I just kind of missed on too much stuff. I think if I had a Tolarian Academy or a Mishra's Workshop, both of those cards would have kind of made the deck to come together. But as it was, I didn't, and it all just felt a little bit too slow.
No, fair. I think my deck was a bit similar. I kind of, despite being the person who built the cube and has the most time looking at the list, I played a deck that my cube doesn't support. I tried to be white-blue tempo.
Ooh,
and it was my cube doesn't support that. But my deck, it definitely did stuff. I was, my low end was a lot of stuff like Malcolm Alluring Scoundrel. That card's actually really good. The one we talked about from Lost Caverns of Its Land. I really like that card, but I had that. I had Mercurius Spelldancer. I had a lot of kind of spell-based stuff. I think I was just missing a top end. And also I'm good at graveyard shenanigans. I'm very good at that. Or just curve out. I'm good at getting the damage through, doing the math with that. I'm not a good control player. I had both Orzhov Teferis in my deck. I was what is this? I drafted the correct cards for my seat, but it didn't mean I enjoyed
it. That's fair. Yeah, I was watching you play with 5-mana Teferi. I was like, "It's the first time you've cast this card, Daniel. You don't." Yeah, no. I mean, you say your cube doesn't support it. I feel like every cube kind of supports look, I've got like some pretty good cheap white creatures and a remand. Deal with it.
Yeah, fair.
Yeah, I think with my deck, I kind of honestly feel like just playing like talismans and stuff is too slow at this point in your cube. Like,
Yeah,
I was just
I'd
losing
agree.
to like initiative creatures and Minsk and Boo and stuff. And
the deck I played this weekend is the first time I put a talisman in my deck in about a year.
Yeah,
and I've been playing artifact. I've been playing the artifact aggro deck that you've been playing quite a bit. Like,
it feels like at the moment in the cube, you kind of just have to be really, really proactive, because the thing is, the reactive stuff just doesn't. Like, I had a lot of removal and whatnot, and I had ways to block, but when they have the initiative, it kind of doesn't matter.
Yeah, and also, like, I never look at talismans for fixing at all anymore, because in my cube specifically, we have original jewels, shocks, 2 of each fetch land in each color, one bonus guild land, and we have triomes, and we also have the full cycle of Lord of the Rings cycling cards. So you do not need to worry about fixing in the slightest. Like, talismans don't need to be there for fixing. So maybe
yeah, for sure. I mean, I was more on talismans because, like, I had a lot of artifact synergies and like just really good 4-drops.
No, that's fair. But like, would you have preferred, like, I don't know, like two Mishra's Baubles or something like that? Would that have been better in your deck than a talisman or something like that?
I think really I just needed like an Ancient Tomb or something so I could actually be getting out a bit quicker.
Most decks need an Ancient Tomb, James.
Yeah, it just feels like, because when you're playing a talisman on 2, right, it's like what you're saying is, I'm going to be behind because I took turn 2 off to play this talisman, but my 4-drop will catch me up. But it's like none of the 4-drops actually catch you up against like the initiative or against Minsk and Boo and stuff like that. They kind of just don't matter anymore, and it feels like if you're behind, you're just dead. I don't know.
Yeah, it's kind of annoying that actually, I think every initiative creature I run in my cube also, none of them are double pipped. They can all be cast off Ancient Tomb. That's lovely. This might be a bigger topic for another time, but yeah, specifically in the most recent update to my cube, I did cut quite a lot of Boris aggro cards.
Yeah.
And Boris aggro won again.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's something we'll kind of... Yeah, I might bring it up to the group at some point, see what we think about balancing it, because yeah, I am trying to keep things fairly balanced, and the last update was trying to curtail it a little bit. I do think, like, if we only really had one player in aggro, so that might have been...
That's true.
They kind of got hooked up. And it was a 6-person one. I think maybe an 8, it might have been a bit more... Some of the more combo decks might have got their pieces, that kind of stuff. But
maybe, yeah. It's true.
Something to consider. Right, I think that's going to bring an end to the episode. James, pleasure as always, man. Thank you very much.
Yep, always good. Trying some magic.
Nice one. Right, just leaves me to thank you all very much for listening. Please make sure that you like the podcast, give us a 5-star review, thumbs up, subscribe. Still haven't looked it up, James. Still haven't looked it up.
I think 5-star review is right. That's what I'm going with.
No, tell a friend. That would be the best one, actually. Please do that if you've enjoyed this episode. It would greatly help us out. But until next time, it's goodbye from me, it's goodbye from James, and we'll see you all soon. Goodbye.